It's just past dawn, April 19th, 1775. A cold mist clings to a village green in Massachusetts. 70-some farmers and tradesmen stand in a thin, uneven line, muskets in hand, breath visible in the April air. Across from them, in perfect formation, a column of British regulars in red coats, nearly 700 strong, comes to a halt. A British officer's voice cuts through the fog. Disperse, you rebels. Nobody knows to this day who fired first. One shot, then a ragged volley. In less than a minute, 8 Americans are dead on the grass at Lexington. That single unclaimed shot, somewhere in the smoke over Massachusetts pasture, will later be called by the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson the shot heard round the world. It's the first blood of war that nobody, not even the men who started it, believed they could win. This is the story of how 13 quarreling colonies with no army, no navy, no money, and barely an idea of what a nation even was, took on the most powerful empire on earth and somehow didn't lose. This is Muhammad, and this is Fire and Liberty. Act 1. A kingdom asleep to revolt. Years 1763 to 1770. To understand how a revolution begins, you have to understand how an empire goes broke. In 1763, Britain had just won the most expensive war of the century, the 7 Years' War, fought across 3 continents. What the colonists called the French and Indian War, Britain won. France was driven out of Canada. The British Empire had never been larger. It had also never been deeper in debt. So Parliament looked at a tax on paper, newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, even marriage licenses. All of it now required an official taxed stamp. It wasn't really about the money, it was about a question that would not go away. Could a parliament 3,000 miles away, in which the colonies had no voice, no vote, no representation at all, simply reach across the ocean and tax them? The colonists had an answer, and it became a rallying cry that would echo for the next decade. No taxation without representation. In Boston, a coalition of merchants, laborers, and agitators, calling themselves the Sons of Liberty, rose up. Stamp distributors were burnt in effigies. One royal official's house was torn apart, board by board, by an angry crowd in the street. The Stamp Act, less than a year old, collapsed under the weight of colonial fury. Parliament repealed it. But Parliament didn't repeal the idea. New taxes followed. The Townshend Acts, duties on glass, paint, paper, tea, and to enforce them, Britain did something that changed everything. It sent soldiers. Thousands of British troops garrisoned in American cities, living among the very people growing to despise them. In Boston, that powder keg finally caught a spark. March 5th, 1770, a cold night. A crowd of colonists taunting a small detachment of British soldiers outside the custom house. Insults, Snowballs, ice, then chaos. Shots ring out into the crowd. 5 Americans lie dead in the snow, their blood staining the streets red in what will be remembered forever as the Boston Massacre. The Empire and its colonies were no longer arguing, they were bleeding. Act 2. The fuse is lit. The years 1770 to 1775. For a few years, an uneasy quiet settled over the colonies. Most of the hated taxes were repealed. Only one remained: a tax on tea. Left standing, Parliament said as a matter of principle. Principle was about to meet the harbour. 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, not to raise the tax, but to save failing British company, the East India Company, by letting it dump cheap tea directly into the colonies, undercutting local merchants, more importantly, normalizing the very tax Americans had been resisting for years. The colonists understood exactly what was happening, and on the night of December 16th, 1773, they answered it. Under cover of darkness, dozens of men, some thinly disguised as Mohawk warriors, rowed out to 3 British ships anchored in Boston Harbor. In near total silence, they boarded, and for 3 hours they worked. 340 chests of tea hacked open and dumped into the harbor. By the time the sun rose, the water was strained brown and the surface was carpeted in floating leaves. It would go down in history as the Boston Tea Party, and in London it was not received as a party. Parliament's response was swift, and it was meant to be crushing. A series of laws the colonists would call the Intolerable Acts. Boston's port, the lifeblood of the city, sealed shut. Massachusetts' own government stripped of its power. British officials granted near total immunity from colonial courts. It was meant to isolate Massachusetts. Instead, it united the other 12 colonies behind it. September 1774. Delegates from across the colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress, the first time these fiercely independent colonies had ever sat down together as something resembling one body. They weren't ready to declare independence, not yet, but they agreed to boycott British goods, and quietly, almost as an afterthought, they agreed that if war came, they would face it together. Act 3. Declaring a Nation. The years 1775 to 1776. 2 months after Lexington and Concord, the colonial militias surrounding besieged Boston dug in on a hill overlooking the city, Breed's Hill, next to Bunker Hill, and dared the British to come take it. They did. 3 times. British regulars marched up that hill in tight formation under blistering fire. Twice they were thrown back, the slope littered with red-coated bodies. On the third assault, the colonists, finally out of ammunition, were overrun. Technically, it was a British victory. They took the hill. It didn't feel like a victory. Britain lost over 1,000 men taking a single hill from the farmers and tradesmen. The message was unmistakable. This would not be the quick, humiliating colonial surrender London expected. That same summer, the Continental Congress made a fateful choice. They took the ragtag, malicious. He inherited a force that was, by any honest measure, barely an army at all. Untrained, unpaid, desperately short on gunpowder, and yet, through the brutal winter of 1775 into 1776, Washington held that siege together. And when cannons dragged in a brutal 300-mile trek from the captured Fort Ticonderoga were finally hauled onto the hills above Boston, the British had no choice. March 1776, they evacuated the city by sea. But independence, actual formal independence, was still an open question, debated furiously in Philadelphia. Then, in the summer of 1776, a Virginia lawyer named Thomas Jefferson was handed the pen. July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted his words. Words that didn't just announce a war, they announced an idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It was a radical claim for its time, and one the new nation would spend the next century and beyond, failing to live up for millions of the enslaved people within its own borders. But, as a declaration of war aims, it was unlike anything a rebellion had ever issued before. This was no longer a tax dispute. This was a new nation declaring itself into existence. The British answer came almost immediately, and it was the largest expeditionary force the Empire had ever assembled. 32,000 troops landed in New York. That summer, Washington's army, barely 20,000 untrained men, was outflanked, outgunned, and nearly destroyed at the Battle of Long Island. New York City fell. Then it kept failing. White Plains, Fort Washington, one disaster after another, as Washington's broken army retreated across New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. By December 1776, the revolution was, by most measures, dying. Enlistments were about to expire. Morale had collapsed. Thomas Paine, watching the retreat, wrote the words that would become the army's rallying cry. These are the times that try men's souls. Washington needed something, anything, to keep the cause alive. So, on the brutally cold night of December 25th, 1776, he gambled everything. Under the cover of Christmas night storm, Washington's army crossed the ice-choked Delaware River and marched through the night to fall on a garrison of sleeping Hessians, mercenaries at Trenton. It was a complete surprise. Nearly 1,000 Hessians were captured in under an hour, for almost no American losses. It was a small battle. It saved the revolution. Act 4. The Darkest Valley, 1777 to 1778. The year 1777 brought Britain's most ambitious plan yet. A three-pronged strategy to cut the rebellion in half, isolate Yorktown called Saratoga. October 1777, Bourguignon surrendered his entire army, nearly 6,000 men. It was without question the single greatest American victory of the war so far, and it changed everything. Watching from across the Atlantic, France, Britain's oldest rival, still bitter over its own defeat in the French and Indian War, finally had the proof it needs. This rebellion could actually win. In early 1778, France formally allied with the United States, bringing money, weapons, and eventually a navy that would prove decisive. But triumph in the north came alongside agony elsewhere. While Saratoga was being won, Washington's main army was enduring the worst winter of the war at a frozen, half-starved camp in Pennsylvania, Valley Forge. No real food, no real shoes, soldiers wrapped bleeding feet in rags. No real shelter beyond hastily built log huts. Roughly 2,000 men, nearly a quarter of the army, died that winter, not in battle. From cold, from hunger, and from disease. Yet somehow, the army that walked out of Valley Forge in the spring of 1778 was stronger than the one that walked in. A Prussian volunteer, Baron von Steuben, spent that brutal winter drilling the ragged Continentals into something resembling a professional fighting force. Discipline, formation, the basics of soldiering that they'd never had time to learn. The Continental Army that survived Valley Forge was smaller. It was also, for the first time, a real army. Act 5. The war moves south. 1778 to 1781. By 1778, the war in the north had stalled into something close to a standoff, so Britain shifted its strategy south, betting that loyalist support in Georgia and the Carolinas could roll the rebellion back, colony by colony. For a while it worked devastatingly. Well, Savannah fell. Then, in 1780, Charleston, along with an entire American army. For once, everything aligned at exactly the right moment. A French fleet commanded by Admiral de Grasse arrived first, won a naval battle that sealed off the Chesapeake Bay, cutting Cornwallis from any rescue by sea. Washington, seeing an opportunity of a lifetime, marched his army, alongside French troops under General Rochambeau, nearly 400 miles south in total secrecy to trap Cornwallis on land. The siege of Yorktown lasted 3 weeks. The American and French artillery pounded the British defenses into rubble. On October 14th, in midnight assault, American and French troops stormed 2 key British redoubts in brutal hand-to-hand fighting and took them both. Cornwallis had nowhere left to go. On October 19, 1781, the British army at Yorktown marched out and laid down its arms as the defeated soldiers surrendered. Their band reportedly played an old tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." It was not an exaggeration. Act 6. A New Nation. 1781 to 1783. Yorktown didn't instantly end the war. Fighting continued in scattered pockets for almost 2 more years, and a peace negotiated across an ocean takes time. But in London, the political will to continue had finally broken. In September 1783, British and American diplomats signed the Treaty of Paris. Britain formally recognized the United States of America as a free, sovereign, independent nation. 8 years of war, tens of thousands dead, an empire's grip broken by farmers, tradesmen, and an army that had spent half its existence on the edge of collapse. And then came a moment almost as remarkable as the war itself. George Washington, the most powerful man in the new nation, commanding an army that in that era could easily have crowned him a king. He walked into a room in Annapolis in December 1783, resigned his commission voluntarily, completely. He handed back his power and went home to his farm. It was, by the standards of every revolution before it, almost unthinkable. That's the story. From a foggy green in Lexington to a tobacco port in Yorktown, 8 years, 13 quarrelsome colonies, one unlikely army, and an idea, flawed, unfinished, still being